This little book, this diary. It wasn't much bigger than my hand, just a cheap leather-bound thing Hella picked up God knows where, but I'm telling you, it felt heavier than any ammunition crate I'd ever humped. It sat there in the breast pocket of my tunic, right over my heart, and with every step I took on those muddy roads, it was like a lead weight. I could feel it, a constant, nagging pressure, a secret I was carrying that was worse than any fear of the Ivans or the armies. You see, I'd read it. I hadn't meant to, not really. It fell out of his pack one night when we were digging in near some God-forsaken Ukrainian village, a place that was just a collection of burnt-out huts and the smell of wet ash. The kid was dead on his feet, asleep almost before his head hit the ground, and this little book just tumbled into the mud. I picked it up, meaning to just shake the dirt off and put it back, but my fingers, they just froze on the cover. I knew what was in it. I'd seen him writing in it by candlelight, his face all serious, his brow furrowed like a schoolboy doing his homework. And something in me, the old sergeant, the guy who's supposed to know what's going on inside his men's heads, made me open it. And that's when the real weight settled in. Reading Heller's words was like looking at this war through a clean pane of glass, before the mud and the blood and the shit had caked it over. He was just a kid, 19 years old, from some little town in Bavaria, where the biggest event of the week was the church bell ringing. He wrote about the things we all saw, but he saw them with an innocence I'd lost years ago. He didn't just see a dead Russian soldier. He saw a man with a wedding ring on his finger and a picture of a woman and a child tucked in his pocket, and he wondered if that man had been a teacher or a farmer. He didn't just see a destroyed village. He described the smell of burnt bread from a collapsed oven, the way a child's doll lay face-down in a puddle, its porcelain head cracked. He wrote about the orders we got, the ones that made your stomach turn, the ones you didn't question out loud, but that sat in your gut like a rotten meal. He wrote them down, plain as day, with an honesty that was so damn brave and so damn stupid it made my heart ache. It was the war, but it was the war through the eyes of someone who hadn't yet learned to build a wall between what he saw and what he felt. Reading it was like watching my own self, back in 41, marching into Russia thinking we were liberators, heroes, writing letters home full of pride and nonsense about the fatherland. I remember those first months like a fever dream. Everything was new, the dust of Poland still on my boots, but feeling like one of the giants from the newsreels. We were invincible. The sun was always shining in those memories, even when it was raining. I wrote letters to my Anna filled with this bluster. I talked about the vastness of the steppe, the might of our panzers, the camaraderie of the men. I used words like duty and honor, without really knowing what the hell they meant outside of a parade ground. I was so green. I remember seeing my first dead man, one of ours, hit by a stray mortar. He was just a boy, younger than Hella, and his face was peaceful, like he was sleeping. But the flies had already found him, a black cloud buzzing around the mess that was his chest. I threw up behind a truck, my hands shaking, and that night I wrote to Anna about the beautiful Ukrainian sunset. I couldn't tell her about the flies. I couldn't tell her that the smell of blood gets in your clothes and doesn't ever really leave. I built that wall brick by brick, with every engagement, every retreat, every frozen corpse we stepped over in the snow. And watching Hella now was like watching that wall being built in fast motion. You could see the cracks forming. The jokes got darker, the silences got longer. The light in his eyes, that naive spark, was flickering, dying out like a candle in a draft. And then I got to the last entry he'd written. We'd just fallen back from a position near a river crossing. It had been bad. The partisans had been active, and Command had decided to make an example. I don't even want to say what happened. You don't give orders like that to men who are exhausted, scared, and have seen too many of their friends blown to pieces. You just don't. But they did, and Hella was there. He saw it, and he wrote it all down. His handwriting, usually so neat and precise, was a mess, scrawled and shaky, the letters stumbling over each other. He didn't use any big words, no grand pronouncements. He just described what he saw, what he heard, the way an old woman screamed, the blank look on the face of one of the veterans from the penal battalion as he did what he was told. He ended it with one sentence that haunts me still. I think my soul has left my body and is trying to find its way home, but it is lost. I read that sentence and my blood went cold. It was more than despair. It was a condemnation. It was the truth, raw and ugly, and in the world we were living in, the truth was a death sentence. A few days later, we got word that the field post was collecting mail. It was a rare moment of near normalcy. The shelling had stopped for a few hours, and the sun was actually out. Men were laughing, digging out paper and pencils, trying to find a piece of the world they'd left behind to send home. Heller was beaming. He'd sealed his diary up in a package for his mother, along with a short letter. He was so proud of it. "She'll understand," he said to me, his eyes still holding a shred of that old hope. "She'll know what it's really like." And that's when I knew what I had to do. My stomach was in knots. That little package in my hand felt like it was burning me. If his mother received that, God, the Gestapo read everything. Despair was a crime. Defeatism could get your whole family a visit, a one-way ticket to a place you didn't come back from. They take that diary not as a son's confession, but as evidence. And Heller himself, they'd make an example of him. A quick court-martial, a bullet to the back of the head for undermining morale. I'd seen it happen to a guy in another company for just saying he was tired of the rain. This was 1,000 times worse. But it wasn't just about saving him from a firing squad. It was about saving his family from that burden. What mother should have to read that? What father should have to know that his boy's soul was lost in the mud of Russia? It was a kindness, a terrible, awful kindness, to let them keep their image of their brave son, even if it was a lie. So I told him I'd take the mail bag to the collection point myself. I walked away from the company, my boots sinking into the thick, cloying mud, the sounds of the men fading behind me. I found a shell crater, half full of stagnant, oily water. The smell of cordite and decay was thick in the air. I knelt down, my knees cracking, the weight of my years suddenly feeling very real. I took his package out of the bag. I looked at his neat handwriting on the address label. For a moment I almost couldn't do it. I thought, who am I to decide this? Who am I to play God with his memories, with his truth? But then I saw his face, young and trusting, and I saw the face of the dead boy from years ago with the flies on him, and I knew I was his sergeant. My duty wasn't just to get him through the next attack. It was to get some part of him, the part that still knew right from wrong back home, even if it was a lie, especially if it was a lie. I struck a match. The sound was ridiculously loud in the silence. The little flame danced, a tiny, fragile piece of light in all that gloom. I held it to the corner of the diary. The cheap paper caught quickly, curling and blackening, the words he'd poured his heart into turning to smoke. I watched it burn, page by page, the heat warming my face. I felt like I was destroying the last clean piece of him, the last honest thing in this whole rotten war. I was burning his soul to save his life. The ashes were light grey flakes that drifted down into the murky water. And when it was done, I just sat there for a long time empty. I'd done what I thought was right, but it felt like a betrayal deeper than any I could imagine. When I got back, Heller was waiting. "Did you get it off, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice full of hope. I couldn't look him in the eye. I stared at a spot just past his shoulder at the torn-up earth. "The mail truck," I said, my voice flat and dead. "It took a direct hit from a mortar on the way out. Everything's gone, nothing left but scraps." I'd rehearsed the lie, but saying it out loud made it real, made me a coward. The light in his eyes died right there. It just went out. The disappointment was like a physical thing, a wound I'd inflicted. His shoulders slumped, and he just nodded, turning away without a word. That was worse than if he'd shouted at me. That quiet acceptance of another random, cruel act of war. Seeing that look on his face was a different kind of death. But it was better than the alternative. It had to be. This war, it takes everything from you. Your friends, your sleep, your innocence. The least I could do was steal one memory, one terrible, honest memory, and let the lie stand in its place. It was an unspoken pact between us grunts, the ones who actually lived it. You protect your men, not just from the enemy, but from the truth of what we'd become. You let them believe the mail bag just got blown up, a simple tragedy. Because the real tragedy, the one I held burning in my hands in that crater, was too heavy for any mother's heart to bear, and too damning for any soldier to write down and live. So I carry that weight for him now. It's my burden. It's the price of the stripes on my sleeve. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I can still smell the smoke from those pages. You never forget the taste. That's the thing they don't tell you. It gets in your soul, that damn flesh conserve, the canned meat they called it, as if giving it a proper name could make it anything other than what it was. A greasy, salty, vaguely pinkish paste that clung to the roof of your mouth. I can still taste it now, 50 years later, if I think about it. I tasted it in the mud of Ukraine, in the snow outside Stalingrad, in the dust of a dozen forgotten Russian villages. It was the flavor of being cold and scared, the metallic tang of the tin mixing with the iron scent of blood in the air. That little can was your universe for a day. You'd open it with your bayonet, the stock of the metal puncturing the lid, the most important sound you'd hear all morning. You'd try not to look at it too closely, because if you did, you'd see the little white flecks of fat, the unidentifiable bits, and your stomach would turn. But you ate it. God, you ate it. You de-smear it on the hard, grey bread, the karmisbrat we called it, which was like trying to eat a brick. You had to soak that bread in your coffee just to get your teeth into it without chipping one. It was a paradox, you see. That bread could break your teeth, but it also kept you alive. So much of that life was a paradox like that. The things that hurt you were the same things that saved you. Everything became currency out there. A cigarette wasn't just a cigarette. It was a bargaining chip, a piece of your sanity. I remember once, it must have been during the autumn rains, the mud so thick it would pull your boots right off your feet. We'd been on nothing but these wretched cans for a week. A guy from another squad, a Bavarian named Klaus, he'd managed to scrounge a few potatoes from a field. Just a few, dirty and small. I saw him and my mouth started watering like I was a dog. I had a half-pack of cigarettes left, my last real treasure from a parcel from home. I walked over, the mud sucking at my boots like it didn't want to let me go. I didn't say much. You didn't have to. I just held out 2 cigarettes. He looked at them, then at me, his face gaunt and older than his years. He nodded, a quick, sharp movement, and handed me a single potato. It was cold and lumpy in my hand, and it felt heavier than a grenade. That potato, boiled in my mess tin over a tiny, furtive fire, was the best meal I had in months. That was the economy of survival. It wasn't about money. It was about what would keep the gnawing in your belly quiet for a few more hours. But the real event, the thing that could lift the spirit of the entire company, was the sound of the field kitchen truck. After days of cold rations, when your body felt like it was turning to ice from the inside out, you'd hear it, a distant, grinding roar, a mechanical sound that was more beautiful than any symphony. "The Gyulush cannon is coming," someone would shout, and a ripple of something like happiness would go through the men. You'd see heads popping up from foxholes, gaunt faces actually breaking into smiles. That truck meant hot food. It meant a few minutes of warmth. They'd ladle out this thin stew, ersatz everything, of course ersatz coffee made from roasted barley, ersatz potatoes, ersatz meat, but it was hot. You decradle the mess tin in your hands, letting the heat seep into your frozen fingers, and for just a moment you weren't a soldier. You were just a man having a warm meal. The steam would rise up and fog your glasses, and you'd breathe in that smell, and it was a moment of pure, simple comfort in a world that had gone completely mad. That's when you saw the brotherhood, the real brotherhood. If a guy got a slightly bigger piece of meat, he'd break it in half and give part to his buddy. A piece of chocolate from home, a tiny square, would be passed around so everyone could have a sliver, just to remember what sweetness tasted like. We were a brotherhood of the hungry, bound together by shared deprivation. You learned who a man really was by how he acted when the food came around. The selfish ones, they didn't last long. Not because they were shot, but because the rest of us, we'd isolate them. Out there, you needed your buddies, and your buddies needed you. It was that simple. Because the hunger, you see, was a constant companion, more persistent than the fear of enemy fire, because the fear came and went in sharp, terrifying bursts. The hunger was always there, a deep, gnawing emptiness in your gut that was a physical pain. It was a dull ache that followed you on march, stayed with you in the trenches, and woke you up at night. It stripped away everything. All your pride, your education, your memories of being a civilized human being, it all got sanded away by the constant, grinding hunger. You became an animal, a thing that just wanted to eat. Your world shrank down to the size of your stomach. I'd lie in my foxhole, trying to sleep, and my mind would betray me. It would take me home, to my mother's kitchen. I could smell the rye bread she baked every Saturday, the real stuff, with a crust that crackled and a soft, warm inside. I could taste the potato pancakes she made, fried crisp in goose fat, with applesauce on the side. The memories were so vivid, so real, it was a form of torture. I'd actually salivate, my mouth watering for a ghost of a meal, and then I'd open my eyes and see the dirt wall of the hole I was lying in, and the hunger would punch me in the gut all over again. It was cruel, what your own mind would do to you. That's why what happened with the chicken felt so monumental. It was late, deep winter. The cold was a living thing, biting at any exposed skin. We were a ragged bunch, down to a handful of men in our squad, holed up in what was left of a village. The Russians had pushed through a week before, and everything was picked clean. But me and France, my oldest friend from basic training, we were scouting the perimeter and we found it, a deserted farmhouse on the very edge of the village. It looked like every other bombed-out shell, but something made us poke around the barn. Behind a collapsed stall, under a pile of straw, France found a small, hidden cache. A few frozen carrots, rock-hard and dirty. A jar of pickles with the glass cracked, but the contents miraculously saved. And then, a miracle upon a miracle. A scrawny, half-frozen chicken, hidden in a burlap sack, clucking softly. It was so thin you could see its ribs, but to us, it was a treasure beyond measure. A king's ransom. We smuggled it back to the cellar where we were sheltered, our hearts pounding like we just robbed a bank. The other three guys, Wilhelm, the old veteran from Hamburg, young Peter, who was just a boy, and Eugen, our corporal, their eyes went wide. For the first time in months, there was a genuine, uncynical light in them. We had a plan, a real, proper plan that didn't involve killing or digging or running. We were going to cook a feast. Wilhelm, who'd been a cook before the war, took charge. We'd pluck the chicken, boil it with the carrots to make a broth, use the pickles as a side. We even had a few potatoes we'd been hoarding. It was going to be a meal, a return to normal life, if only for one evening. The anticipation was like a drug. We forgot the war. We forgot the cold. Peter was put on watch duty, and the rest of us got to work. I remember the feeling of the chicken's feathers, how surprisingly soft they were, and the sound of Wilhelm humming as he showed us how to clean it properly. We had a small fire going in a dugout in the cellar, the smoke curling up through a crack in the ceiling. The smell as that scrawny bird started to boil in the pot. It was the most beautiful smell in the world. It was the smell of home, of peace, of being human. We must have been at it for an hour. The broth was starting to simmer, filling the cramped space with that promise of warmth and nourishment. We were laughing, actually laughing, telling stories that had nothing to do with the war. We were just 5 men, waiting for a meal. And then the world ended. It didn't start with a whistle. It started with a sound like the sky being torn in half. The first shell landed maybe 50 meters away. The concussion hit the cellar like a physical blow, shaking dirt loose from the ceiling, rattling our teeth. The pot of soup wobbled precariously. Then another, closer. And then the barrage truly began. It was the Russians. They were shelling the village again. Eugen was shouting, "Out now, to the trenches." There was no hesitation. You moved on instinct, survival. We grabbed our rifles, our helmets, and scrambled up the cellar steps into hell. The world was noise and light and shrieking metal. I took one last look back, down into the cellar. The pot was still over the little fire, our beautiful, precious feast. And then a shell landed right on the farmhouse above. The ceiling of the cellar collapsed, and everything, the chicken, the broth, the carrots, the dream of a hot meal was buried under tons of rubble. We ran for our lives through the exploding darkness, our stomachs empty, the glorious smell of that chicken replaced by the acrid stench of cordite and death. We lost Peter that night. A piece of shrapnel. He never got to taste the soup. That abandoned meal, that small, lost feast, felt like the entire war in miniature. A tiny spark of hope, of humanity, snuffed out by the immense, stupid, wasteful machinery of war. We survived the barrage, but we never spoke of the chicken again. Some losses are too small and too big to put into words. You just carried them with you, another kind of hunger that never really went away. The captain's voice was low, almost a whisper, like he was telling us a secret instead of planning our tomorrow. We huddled around him, a bunch of ghosts in the fading light, and every word he said landed in my gut like a stone. Dawn, push forward, secure the woodline. It was all just fancy talk for one thing, a slaughter. We all knew it. You could smell it on the air, that metallic taste of fear mixed with the damp earth of the foxhole. But what do? You nod. You try to look like a soldier. Some of the guys, the real old-timers, they even cracked a joke, something dark about the chow being the last decent meal we'd get. We all laughed, but it was a hollow sound, a thin sheet of ice over a lake of pure terror. It didn't fool anybody. Your eyes give you away. You look at the fella next to you, and you see the same thing staring back, a kid trying real hard not to piss his pants. After the briefing broke up, I figured I should write a letter home. I had this little pad of paper, the kind my mom sent me, all smudged from being in my pocket. I uncapped my pen, pressed the point to the paper, and nothing. My hand was shaking so bad I couldn't form a single word. What was I gonna say? Dear Mom, tomorrow we're going over the top, and I'm pretty sure I'm not coming back. You can't put that on paper. It's like speaking a curse into the world. So I just sat there, holding that shaking pen, staring at a blank page that felt like my own damn future. After a while, you just fall back on the routines. They're a comfort, you know, like your muscles know what to do even if your brain has checked out. I must have checked my M1 Garand 10 times, running the cloth over the barrel, checking the action, making sure the clip slid in smooth. It was all clean, of course. It was always clean, but your hands need something to do. It's the same with the little things you carry, the stuff that isn't army issue. I had a photograph of my girl, Betty, tucked right here in my helmet liner. She was smiling, this big, bright smile that didn't know a thing about places like this. I'd look at it, so much the edges were soft. And a lucky silver dollar my dad gave me before I shipped out. I'd rub it between my thumb and finger until it was warm. It was silly, but it felt like a tiny piece of a different world, a world where people sat on porches and talked about the weather. That's when the quiet conversations start. Not about big ideas, not about winning the war or beating the Nazis. Nobody talks like that the night before an assault. It's all small promises, whispered so low you can barely hear them. The guy in the next hole, Jimmy, he was from Ohio. He leaned over and said, "Hey, Kraut, if I buy it tomorrow, you make sure to tell my kid I was thinking about him, okay?" We called him Jimmy, but his name was James. He had a boy he'd never seen, just a photo of a red-faced baby. And you just nod. You say, "Sure, Jimmy, I'll tell him." And you do the same for me. That's it. That's the contract you sign. It's heavier than any oath you take to the army. And then the waiting really gets to you. It's the sounds, or the lack of them. The enemy lines over there were dead quiet. No mortars, no machine gun fire, nothing. And that was more frightening than all the artillery in the world. Because you knew they were there. You knew they were waiting, just like us, sighting their MG-42s on the exact patch of dirt we'd have to cross. Your ears become like radar dishes, straining for anything. You'd hear the distant rumble of tanks, way off behind their lines, and you'd try to count them to figure out if they were panzers or just half-tracks, which direction they were heading. It was a useless game, but your mind latches onto anything. And then you'd hear it, the sound you pretend not to hear. A soft, hitching breath from a foxhole a few yards away. A man weeping. Not loud, not dramatic, just this quiet, broken sound, like a little kid who's lost. You don't say anything. You just stare into the dark and let him have his moment. Because tomorrow it might be you. We were all just boys when you get right down to it. Scared boys a long way from home. There comes a point, though, where the fear just runs out. It's like a fuel tank and you've burned through it all. It was maybe an hour before first light. Schmidt, a big lug from Milwaukee, pulled out a crumpled pack of Luckies. He didn't say a word, just lit one, took a deep drag, and passed it to me. I took it, my fingers brushing his, and I inhaled that smoke like it was salvation. We passed that cigarette around, maybe 4 or 5 of us, each man taking a long, slow pull, no words, just the glowing ember moving from one hand to another in the dark. It was a communion, I guess, a last sacrament for the doomed, and that's when the calm hit me. A strange, icy calm. There was nothing left to do. The rifle was clean. The promises were made. The letter wasn't going to get written. It was just waiting, my stomach unclenched. My hands stopped shaking. I just sat there, leaning against the dirt wall of that hole, feeling the cold seep through my uniform, and I watched the sky start to turn from black to a deep, bruised gray. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even a soldier anymore. I was just a thing waiting for a signal. And then it came. Not a loud noise at first, just a whistle, thin and high, cutting through the quiet. And then the world exploded. The fear vanished. It just evaporated. There was no room for it anymore. My body took over. You haul yourself up and out of that hole because staying there means death just as sure as moving does. Your legs move. Your rifle comes up. You hear yourself yelling, a raw, animal sound you don't even recognize. You run forward because there is no backward anymore. You're not thinking about home or glory or anything. You're just a machine, trying to survive the next second and the next while all hell breaks loose around you. That's what it was like. That's what it was always like. The waiting was the worst part, the terrible, quiet agony of being a man who knows what's coming. The fighting, that was just the storm you finally had to walk into. You never forget the sound of your own name being screamed when you're the only one who can help. It was medic, they called, not out there. It was sanitettor. A raw, tearing sound that came from a place deeper than a man's lungs. A sound that clawed its way over the crump of artillery and the steady rattle of machine guns. It was a sound that bypassed your brain entirely and went straight to your gut. A cold hook that pulled you forward no matter how much ever other part of you was screaming to dig deeper into the mud. All that training back in Bavaria, all the neat diagrams and sterile bandaging practice, it just evaporated the first time I heard that cry for real. It wasn't a lesson anymore. It was a man. And that man was one of my kameraden. So you moved. You didn't think, you moved. Your world shrank down to the few meters of Chernodurth hell between your shell hole and his. You'd crawl on your belly, the cold seep of the mud soaking through your feldblus, your face so close to the ground you could taste the iron-rich soil and the foul, sulphurous stink of high explosives. And all the while, you'd hear it the zip-thwack of bullets cutting the air just above you, each one a little message from some Russian soldier you'd never see, each one deciding purely by chance whether you'd be the next one screaming for a sanitettor. Your hands would be trembling, not from fear exactly, but from a kind of terrible urgency, and you'd clutch your sanitet stash like a holy relic, praying the leather case hadn't been punctured by a piece of shrapnel. You'd finally reach him, and the real work would begin, and that was when the training tried to come back, but it was always a fight against the horror of what was right in front of you. I remember one boy, couldn't have been more than 18, fresh-faced replacement they just shoved into our line a day before. A mortar round had landed too close. He was lying there in a mess of his own insides, and the smell, God, the smell of a gut wound is something you can't describe. It's sweet and foul all at once, and it clings to the inside of your nose for days. He was conscious, his eyes wide open, staring at the grey, indifferent sky. He wasn't screaming in pain, which was the worst part. He was just confused. He looked at me as I slid in beside him, my hands already digging for a bandage, and he asked, clear as day, Warham, just that one word. Why? And what do you say to that? There is no answer. You can't say, because some politician in Berlin decided you should die in this godforsaken field in Russia. You can't say anything. So you just lie. You say, you're going to be all right, camarade. Just hold on. Help is coming. And you press the gauze into the hole in his belly, trying to pack the life back inside him, but you know from the grey pallor of his skin and the distant look in his eyes that he's already halfway gone. That's when you reach for the morphine syringe, the little tube with the needle you break off. A small mercy. You jab it into his leg, and for a moment his eyes focus on you, and there's almost a flicker of thanks, and then the confusion returns, but softer now, blurred at the edges. And you feel like a fraud, because this small mercy is all you have to give him. And when your supplies are low, and you have to choose between giving him the last shot or saving it for the next man who might have a chance, that feeling of betrayal becomes a stone in your soul. You make that choice a dozen times a day. The man who's already gone, the one you whisper a prayer over and move on from, his tag's cold in your hand. The man who's got a clean through and through in the arm, who can wait, who you tell to press hard on it and make for the rear if he can. And the man who needs you now, the one who might just make it if you can stop the bleeding and get him back to the aid station. It's a horrible, brutal arithmetic, and you're the accountant of death, adding and subtracting lives in your head with shaking hands. Getting them back to the aid station was its own special kind of nightmare. Sometimes you'd have a stretcher-bearer team, but often it was just you and another guy, dragging or carrying a man who weighed twice his normal weight because he was dead weight, through mud that sucked at your boots like glue. You'd stumble into the bunker or the cellar that served as our aid station, and the air would hit you first. It was a thick, heavy stew of smells, the coppery tang of fresh blood, the sharp bite of antiseptic, the stale sweat of fear, and underneath it all, the faint, sweet smell of death that had already taken up residence in the corners. The light was always dim, just a couple of lanterns or maybe a bare bulb hooked up to a generator, throwing long, dancing shadows on the walls. It was a world of whispers and moans. You lay your man down on a stretcher or a rough wooden table, and the doctor, if we had one, would take over. But sometimes there was no doctor. Sometimes it was just you and the other medics, doing the best you could with scalpels and hope. I remember holding the hand of a sergeant from my company, a tough old bird who'd been with us since France. A piece of shrapnel had torn up his chest. There was nothing to be done. He knew it, and I knew it. His breathing was a wet, ragged sound, like a bellows with a hole in it. I held his hand, and I said all the hollow, useless things you say. "You're a good man, Sergeant. You're going home. Think of your family." He looked at me, his eyes clear and focused, and he squeezed my hand just a little. It wasn't a squeeze of pain, but of recognition. A final, human contact. And then the light went out of his eyes, just like that. The ragged breathing stopped, and there was a silence that was louder than any shell. You close his eyes, and you take his dog tags. One tag stayed with the body, the other went on a string, a collection of names and numbers that grew heavier in your pocket every day. Those tags weren't metal, they were lead. They were the weight of every man you couldn't save, and they haunted your dreams. You'd see their faces, not as they were in death, but as they were in life, laughing over a cigarette, complaining about the food, talking about a girl back home. After the battle, if you could call the constant, grinding attrition a battle, there would be a silence. But it was never truly silent. There would be the moaning of the wounded still out in Narmansland, a sound that would carry on through the night, a chorus of human suffering that you were powerless to stop. The exhaustion would set in then, but it wasn't like being tired from a long march. This was a deep, bone-weary numbness that went right down into your soul. You'd find a quiet corner, maybe light a cigarette with hands that were still stained brown with dried blood, and you'd just sit. You couldn't think, you couldn't feel. You were just empty. The fear would come later in the quiet moments, a cold tremor that started in your spine. You replay every moment, every decision. Did I tie that tourniquet tight enough? Should I have carried that other boy first? Could I have moved faster? The question that lingered, that followed you into a fitful sleep, was always the same. Could I have done more? It was a poison that ate at you. And then there was the ritual of washing up. You'd find a helmet full of muddy water, or if you were lucky, a pump somewhere. You'd scrub your hands raw, the water turning pink, then red, then brown. You de-scrape the blood from under your fingernails, but you never felt clean. No matter how much you scrubbed, you could still smell it on you, that metallic scent of death. It was in your nostrils, in your hair, on your clothes. You could change your uniform, but you couldn't change your skin. You felt marked, different from the other soldiers who fought with rifles. We fought with bandages and morphine, and our battlefield was wherever a man was falling. They'd look at you sometimes, the infantrymen, with a kind of awe and pity. They knew we saw things they didn't, that we carried a different kind of burden. There was a dark humor that got us through, you know. We joke about things that would make a civilian sick to their stomach, like calling the aid station the butcher shop. Or when a new guy would ask what the Surrettes were for, we'd say, "That's your ticket home, son. One way." It was grim, but you had to laugh, or you'd go insane. You'd cling to the small things, the tiny moments of humanity, sharing a piece of scarcalade from home. A letter from your mother, the paper smelling faintly of her perfume, a scent from another world. Looking at a crumpled photograph of your girl, her smile a beacon in all that darkness. That's what you fought for, not for the fatherland or for glory, but for the chance to go back to that, to a life where the loudest sound was a church bell, and the only thing you had to save was your soul. But out there, in the mud and the blood of Russia, you learned that some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some burdens, once picked up, you carry for the rest of your life. You see their faces, you can't help it. They come off the trucks in a clatter of gear and nervous laughter, their uniforms still stiff, their faces so young and clean you can see the peach fuzz on their cheeks. Their eyes, that's what gets you every time. They've got that look, a mixture of questions and a fear they're trying so hard to hide, a flicker of excitement maybe, but mostly it's just the fear. They look at us, the old hands, with our filthy uniforms and thousand-yard stares, and they're trying to read our faces like a book, hoping to find some kind of answer, some secret to surviving this place. And I look at them, and I see myself, what feels like a lifetime ago but was only a year, maybe less. I was just as green, just as dumb, thinking I was invincible, that the stories of the front were just stories, exaggerated for effect. You believe that right up until the first shell screams in and the world turns inside out. We'd watch them stumble into the company area, these kids who should have been back home worrying about baseball scores or a girl from the soda shop. And this wave of, I don't know, it wasn't pity exactly. It was heavier than that. It was a protective instinct, a grim knowledge that settled in your gut like a cold stone. We'd just look at each other, me and the other old-timers, and without saying a word, we all knew it. Most of them wouldn't last the month. A few would get lucky. A few might turn out to have that strange, cold knack for staying alive. But most, they were just fresh meat for the grinder. And it was our job to try and teach them enough to give them a fighting chance, to pass on the hard-earned wisdom that doesn't come from any manual, the lessons written in blood. The first thing you learn, the very first thing that gets hammered into you, is that your life depends on the dirt. It sounds simple, but it's everything. When we got these replacements, the first order of business wasn't teaching them how to shoot straight-feed, and all that in basis it was teaching them how to dig. And I don't mean a little scrape you can lie down in. I mean a foxhole deep enough to matter, a hole you can get your whole body down into when the sky starts falling. You show them where to place the dirt, always on the side facing the enemy, to give you that little extra bit of cover. You teach them to feel the ground, to listen for the scrape of your entrenching tool hitting a root or a rock, and you curse and you sweat until that hole is deep enough that you can't see over the lip. I remember one kid, couldn't have been more than 18. He was digging this pathetic little ditch, complaining about the blisters on his hands. I walked over, didn't say a word, just took his shovel from him and started digging like a man possessed. The soil was cold and heavy, thick with clay, and my back ached like hell, but I didn't stop until it was a proper hole, deep and narrow. I climbed out, covered in muck, and shoved the shovel back into his chest. Like that, I said, my voice hoarse. You dig it like your life depends on it, son, because it damn well does. And then there's the art of listening. Your ears become your best weapon. Out here, your eyes can lie to you, but your ears usually don't. You learn to distinguish the sound of incoming from outgoing artillery. Outgoing has a different kind of roar, a whoosh that fades as it goes away from you. But incoming has a specific sound. It starts as a distant sigh, like a train far away, and then it grows into a shriek, a tearing sound, a freight train coming right through your bedroom wall. You learn to judge by that sound whether it's going to land on your head or 100 yards away. And you learn the other sounds too. The dry rattle of a MG42, that's a sound you never forget. It's faster than ours, like cloth ripping. The slower, heavier thump-thump-thump of our own machine guns. The crisp crack of a rifle versus the heavier boom of a grenade. And the silence could be just as terrifying. Then there are the simple rules, the ones that seem obvious, but someone always has to learn the hard way. Why you never ever shine a light at night, not even for a second to check your watch. A cigarette glow can look like a beacon from a mile away. Why you never stand silhouetted on a ridgeline, because to some sniper 1,000 yards away, you're just a perfect black target against the grey sky. These aren't rules from a book. They're rules written in the blood of the guys who broke them. You learn to move like a ghost, to become part of the landscape, because standing out means dying. It's a strange economy we live in out here, a barter system where the currency is survival. It's not about money or rank, it's about the basics. Always keep your feet dry. That's a mantra. You'd think a wet foot is just uncomfortable, but trench foot. I saw men lose their toes, their whole feet, to the rot and the cold. It's a slow, agonizing death from infection if it gets bad enough. So you learn to take care of your feet like they're your most prized possession. You dry your socks whenever you get a chance, even if it's just hanging them on your pack as you march. You rub them down, you inspect them for blisters. A good pair of dry wool socks was worth more than any medal you could pin on a man. Finding water was another thing. You couldn't just trust a stream. It could be contaminated, or upstream there could be a dead cow, or worse, a dead soldier. You learned which farmhouses are good wells. You learned to collect rainwater in your helmet. You learned to sip, not gulp, because you never knew when you get more. And rations. You learned what to eat right away and what to hoard. The chocolate was good for quick energy, but you saved the hardtack, the canned stuff, for when things got really lean. You developed a taste for things you'd never dream of eating back home. Coffee, thick as mud, boiled in a beat-up canteen cup over a tiny, hidden fire that was heaven. And you learned the value of things. A lucky Zippo lighter could be traded for an extra can of beef stew. A roll of toilet paper was a treasure. But the most valuable thing, the thing you couldn't trade for, was a silent understanding. There would be times, especially in the static lines, when you'd be facing the same German unit for weeks, and an unspoken truce would settle over the lines. You'd hear them talking, coughing, at night. Sometimes one of them would play a harmonica, a lonely, sad sound drifting across Narmansland, and you didn't shoot, because they were just like us, stuck in this hell, trying to stay alive. There was one morning, a fog so thick you could barely see 10 feet, and we could hear them, the Germans, just on the other side of a field, filling their canteens from a pump. We were doing the same, and for about 20 minutes there was this quiet agreement. No shots were fired. We were all just men, thirsty, tired, wanting to see another sunrise. Then the fog lifted and the war started again. But you remember those moments. They remind you that the guy on the other side isn't some monster. He's some poor bastard just like you, wearing a different uniform. But all those practical lessons, they're just the surface. The real lessons, the ones that carve themselves into your soul, they're deeper. The final lesson, the one that matters more than anything, is why you're really fighting. It's not for the flags on a map, not for some general's grand strategy, and sure as hell not for the politicians and their speeches. That all vanishes the first time you see a buddy of yours get hit. You fight for the man next to you. You fight for the guy sharing your foxhole, the guy who gives you his last cigarette, the guy who drags you back to an aid station when you're bleeding out. That's the only thing that makes sense. It's a bond thicker than blood, because it's forged in fear and mud and shared misery. His survival becomes as important as your own, and you have to keep a small piece of yourself separate from all this. You have to guard a memory, a hope, a tiny flicker of the person you were before. For me, it was the memory of a girl back home, Sarah. I had a picture of her, a little faded photograph she'd given me at the train station. I didn't look at it often. I kept it tucked away in my helmet liner, a secret. On the worst days, when the smell of cordite and decay was stuck in your nose and the cold had seeped into your bones, I just touched the edge of my helmet, knowing that picture was there. It was a promise to myself that there was still a world outside this madness, a world of sunlight and quiet and her smile. That little piece of hope, you guard it like a dragon guards its gold, because if you lose that, if you let the war consume everything you are, then you're already dead, even if your body is still walking around. And there's one more rule, a dark one, but it's important. You never, ever promise to write to a buddy's family if he doesn't make it. You see a guy do that, you hear him say, "Hey, if I buy it, you'll write to my mom, right?" And a cold chill goes down your spine. Because making that promise, accepting it, means you've already accepted that he's going to die. It's like you're signing his death warrant. Out here you have to believe, against all odds, that you're all going to make it. You have to cling to that superstition. So when a new guy would say something like that, we'd shut him down fast. "Don't talk like that," we'd growl. "Just keep your head down and your powder dry. We'll all go home together." It was a lie, of course. We all knew it, but it was a necessary lie. Because admitting the truth, that most of us were just waiting for our number to come up, that was a darkness you couldn't come back from. So you lived day to day, hour to hour. You found humor in the bleakest places, a dark, gallows humor that would shock anyone from the outside. You got homesick with an ache that was a physical pain in your chest. You were scared, all the time, a low-grade hum of fear that was just part of your existence. And through it all, you just tried to be a guy another guy could count on. That was the only victory that mattered. Not taking a hill, not capturing a town. Just making it through another day with your buddies and hoping to God you'd see the next. That's what it felt like, from inside the helmet, inside the foxhole, inside the heart of a young man who just wanted to go home.